Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Mayo to the application station. You guys got to see a really excellent amount of information presented the other day of the fauna of Michigan, and give you a little history of why we're doing this today. The Nature Center Summit's been going for 3 years, and a couple years ago, we also started with what we called Wildlife Weekend through Mayo, where we were trying to invite the public to come up and learn some stuff about Michigan as well. And we decided that it would be really nice to have an opportunity for people who worked at nature centers to stay the weekend up at Higgins Lake and learn how to apply what they learned from all the speakers. How could you use this in your different venues to educate people? And we had this grandiose plan of you spending the whole weekend at Higgins Lake and doing all these activities that tie in directly to what we were learning about. And of course, like everything else these days, COVID has kind of knocked that back a notch. Rest assured, we're still gonna try to do this next year where you can spend the whole weekend up at beautiful Higgins Lake, and really probably a good weekend not to be doing it, given that it's freezing outside. I want to give you a brief overview for those of you who aren't real familiar with Mayo. We're the Michigan Alliance for Environmental and Outdoor Education, and we are a collection of nature center people, conservancy people, teachers, people who are just interested in educating people about the environment. We offer all sorts of things. Please, if you have not gone to our new website, see what we have to offer. We give environmental education certification. We are involved with the North American Association of Environmental Educators. So we've gone kind of national. We're doing training for that. We have a great conference with all sorts of things that you can take back and use with you. And the conference this year will be down in Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor area, and it will be some really neat stuff. So we're a great group to network with. And as someone who works in the Nature Center, teachers who show up here are kind of a captive audience. We are people, the teachers already want to take their kids to your places. So it's a great opportunity for everybody. A couple rules about today. This is going to be a lot quicker than the other day. 15-minute segments. We're going to ask that you stay muted and you stay with, I don't know, non-videoed, I guess, for lack of a better word. And at the end, it'll be about a half hour. You can feel free to submit questions. We will try to get to your questions. At the end of all this, we will get you all the presentations and all of the, not just the video, but also any of the PowerPoints and other things you see will be made available to you. We'll collect them up into a Google Drive, and then we will send you the link to that as well. It will probably take a week or so, but we can probably ask you some questions in the last 25 minutes, but we're also going to spend a little time then talking about what we learned yesterday, maybe some other things that you are planning to do with that knowledge in your spots. We can share that with other people as well. We hope this is a real meaningful opportunity for you, and we really appreciate you spending your Saturday after the day of sitting watching all that great stuff to look at a little bit about the art of how we actually bring this to the masses. And we're really think you're going to walk away real pleased with this. So I think that's all I have here. We are recording this, like I said. If you have any questions, please, you can put it into the chat. We're not doing the question and answer thing that we said the other day. And if there is time at the end of somebody's session, there might be some time for question and answer before the next session starts. But with 15 minutes, there probably won't be a ton of time, but we will get to everything that you have questions about. Trying to think. Anybody have anything to add before we get started?
Bill, if you want to just remind people that to be able to see the speaker in a larger window, if you're not familiar with Zoom, in the upper right-hand corner of your window, there's a little icon that says View. If you click on that and then put it on Speaker View, and then the speaker will be main part of the screen, and the rest of the participants will be along the top.
Thank you. That's very true. The speaker view will let you see the person, and we're going to be highlighting the speaker all the way through in case there is somebody who's not muted We're hoping that people will be muted, but if that happens, it will stay on the speaker's view. That also helps with us recording. Good point. Anything else? Excellent. So we're going to start a little early, which is good because people have some good stuff to share. Our first presenter today is Mr. John Gray. John is retired middle school teacher, head of the Safari Club, and long time board member and member of Mayo. And he's going to talk about January Thaw. John?
As Bill said, my name is John Gray. I'm a recently retired 8th grade middle school teacher in Lake Orion, and the activity that I'm doing today is one that I would do every year with my students. They seem to enjoy it, and it's called January Thaw, and it came as a result of reading the Sand County Almanac to my students. And if you are not familiar with this book, pick up a copy of it. It's by Aldo Leopold and his essays from the shack where he had a, I guess a vacation shack, for lack of a better term, in Wisconsin. And he wrote extensively while he was there. And the Sand County Almanac contains essays by the month about what he was doing and what he saw going on at his farm at that time of the year. And it's kind of nice here in Michigan that, you know, we're on par latitude-wise with Wisconsin. So a lot of his essays kind of go along with what we experience here in Michigan at the same time of the year. So the first thing I do is usually read the essay by the month. And so January's essay is called January Thaw. And I would do it a couple different ways. One would be I had a classroom set of the Sand County Almanacs. So sometimes I would just have them read along as I read it. Sometimes they would do popcorn reading and different ideas. But one of the most popular ways was to do a PowerPoint. I was able to find online a PowerPoint or a resource that had PowerPoints for all of the essays in the first part of the Sand County Almanac. So I pulled up the January one and I edited it down to just a few slides just so you can get an idea of what it looks like. So I'm going to pull that up for you now. Share my screen. So this is Sand County Almanac. January Thaw being the first essay in the year. It's in chronological order. The months of the year from January up to June are a geometric progression in the abundance of distractions. In January, one may follow a skunk track or search for bands on the chickadees, or see what young pines the deer have browsed, or what muskrat houses the mink have dug, with only an occasional and mild digression into other doings. January observation can be almost as simple and peaceful as snow, and almost as continuous as cold. There is time not only to see who has done what, but to speculate why. And this is a picture of a deer bed where a deer had bedded down the night before. So take it off, share. So you can find these slides, and I've got a resource at the end that has the website where you can find this. But these slideshows are available. They're copyright protected, but I was given permission to use it today, and I'm sure you wouldn't have a problem using it in your classroom. So I did this with 8th graders, and as I was thinking about it, I thought, well, not everybody is teaching middle school. Maybe there is somebody that is doing something with a younger group of students. So I went on and found a kind of a corresponding story that would go along with what you are teaching about the winter tracks and January Thaw, but it maybe is in a way that younger kids could understand it. So I'm gonna pull up what I found online here. And this is a book called Footprints in the Snow. and it's 2 minutes, so I'm just going to play it. It's kind of interesting. Figures.
Hello, little readers. Today we're going to read Footprints in the Snow by Cynthia Benjamin, illustrated by Jacqueline Rogers. Winter snow falls. Winter wind blows. Someone hops home. Someone runs home. Someone stomps home. Someone swims home. Someone races home. Someone flies home. Someone hurries home. Someone scampers home. Someone walks home. Winter snow falls. Winter wind blows. The end.
So this would be a simple
For
way
more stories, please subscribe to our channel, Little Readers.
to be able to share the story without getting into the Sand County Almanac, which might be a little bit too old for some audiences. So the next part of what I did is, after we talked about animals that are out in the winter and the tracks and the sign that they leave behind, the scat and the uneaten food, etc. Then the students would go back and do some research on animals that can be found in Michigan in the winter. And in the back of my room, I would have stations set up. At each table, have a couple different artifacts from different animals. So I would have some pelts and skins. So here's a beaver. Here's a coyote. And the students would be able to touch them and feel them and check out what the characteristics are that maybe help them survive in their environment. So we talk about the fact that beaver has an underlayer of fur that is waterproof because they live in the water. We talk about the fact that deer have hollow hair that gives them insulation during the rest of the, or during the cold times. We'd also have skulls. So we could talk about how the beaver has large teeth that continue to grow and that they have to continually gnaw on the wood to be able to keep those from growing. We talk about the type of teeth that they have flat teeth, so that those are good for an herbivore for grinding. We look at coyote skull, look at the difference in the teeth. How these teeth are sharp for tearing, so they're a carnivore. Talk about their eye sockets, eyes at the front, animals that hunt, predators, eyes to the side, animals that hide, prey species. I would also have some taxidermy type examples of animals that I would have back there. Also have Repla tracks and Repla scat. So these are rubber tracks from the different animals, and then this would be scat. You could talk about the size of the foot and the characteristics of it and how that helps them get through the snow. Talk about the scat and what you might find in the scat, whether it's going to be plant material or others for if they're a carnivore or an omnivore. And then they would also have tracks, books. So they'd have to look up information about the animals and fill in a sheet. And that sheet is, and they would talk about the different animals, the habitat, where do they live, the physical description of it, a drawing of the tracks, and then what does it eat. And so they had a choice of these different animals at each table. And all of these are animals that can be found in Michigan in the winter, this time of year. So they had to do a little bit of research with that. And then they would do a drawing. And this part I would do a couple different ways. One of them was to draw it and first, and then have to, your partner interpret it. And the other one was to do the story first and then have your partner illustrate it. So this is an example of the story. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm not seeing it. The prompt for the story would be something like this. You basically came out in the morning, and after a snowfall overnight, you saw a bunch of tracks in the snow, and you're to draw a bird's eye view of what happened in the snow. So these are some different ideas for tracks. These are just things that I came up with. You can come up with your own if you want. And then deciduous and coniferous trees, using red for blood, blue for water, etc. And you had to include the animals that you had researched. And so this is an example of one that I did. So this is just a drawing that I had done, showing a mink going along the water and going into a muskrat house, turkey coming down off of the roost, a beaver coming out of its lodge and cutting down chewing down a tree and then back into the water, a deer walking through, a coyote getting a squirrel or a mouse, those types of things that were happening. And then they had to come up with what they think happened in that story. And there are different sources to be able to do your tracks. I found this source online. It was a tracks that's made, is put out by hikingmichigan.com. And I'll give you the resource at the end, but it's a bunch of Michigan animals that are out in the wintertime that you might find the tracks from. And then the students, the partner would have to interpret the story, what happened based on what you saw in this drawing, and write that down, your interpretation of it. The other way to do it would be to have them write the story first and then have their partner illustrate it based on using those different tracks. And then the final thing that we did was to go outside. And when we went outside, we would look at, I had the students take pictures of tracks that they found in the snow. So these are just examples of tracks that the kids took pictures of. And also scat that was left behind, and get it to come up. So this was a track that they found in the area around the school. Some tracks in the snow, some scat, burrow, muskrat house, some unknown tracks that I couldn't figure out what those were, and nobody else could figure them out. And then this was a student brought this in. They found this in their yard, and I'm doing it in reverse order. Wing prints with feathers, and they had seen a Cooper's hawk there. So this is, my time's about up here, my 15 minutes, but this is just, I guess, a series of activities, all of them based around the January thaw essay in a Sand County Almanac. Okay. My time's up. And that's about it. I'm not sure that we would have time for questions right now, but like Bill said, if you've got questions, you can put them in. I did say that I would have resources. So let me pull up the resources. So Sand County Almanac, slideshare.net is where you can find the PowerPoints, Footprints in the Snow by Cynthia Benjamin. Repliscat tracks can be found at different supplies, Nature Watch, etc. Or you can look at taxidermists. And then the tracks guide that I had at the end there was hikingmichigan.wordpress.com. Okay, I'm a minute over. Sorry, Bill.
All right, thank you so much, John. Up next, we have Nicole Kantz from Michigan Great Lakes Virtual Academy, and she is going to talk about virtual classroom teaching, adapting hands-on activities to a virtual teaching setting. Welcome, Nicole.
Hi. I am Nicole. I do have a PowerPoint, and I'm what's it called? Zoom is not my forte, so we are going to try this and not screw things up. See if it comes up. Let's change that. Okay, so I am a science teacher for Michigan Great Lakes Virtual Academy. Most classroom teachers have found out in the last year that it is very hard to adapt in-person classroom teaching to the virtual world without completely flipping the script and changing things over. So I decided that it would be fun to share how I do my classroom teaching. I work for Michigan Great Lakes Virtual Academy. We are a full-time virtual school. I have been working there for almost 5 years in February 16th. So excited to come up on that. And I started out in biology, and this is my 4th year, I think 3rd year now, teaching environmental science. And so trying to make those hands-on learning experience work for a virtual classroom proved to be pretty hard for me. And so just kind of sharing how I have adapted my class to instead of a sit and get to making kids do. So we're gonna actually focus on one topic of exploring those limited resources. The game that always comes to my mind is when I was in school, we always played the Oh Deer game where there were deer and then there was resources and you chose what resource you were going to and then you had to run and go find it. And I have adapted that to my class. I forgot to set my timer, sorry guys. There we go. And then I also want to be able to give you some virtual resources that will kind of help in doing those things because Zoom is one of the big platforms. Sometimes it's not necessarily easy to do hands-on and getting the kids involved when it comes to Zoom. I know there's the polling option, and I know there's some other things that are able to be done. I've heard there's breakout rooms in Zoom, never used them before, but some other options to be able to get kids to actually do these things. So we talk about carrying capacity and limiting resources. It is a one of my whole units is around populations and the changes in populations. And so I'm going to bring in this one activity I use. We talk about limiting factors. I have the kids choose what animal they want to do and want to be. My simulation does break down very quickly in this, but what I do is I start with 2 people that want to be volunteers, and they are fighting for resources on the board. Let me grab this Jamboard link for you guys. And so my platform that I use is different. And so I don't use Jamboard, but it is something that, like, if you go to this, you have the tools to be able to cover up a resource. So if I had 2 volunteers, I would say on the count of 3, choose your resource. And they would have to cover up a resource of their choosing. So they're fighting for those resources. Well, this many resources, those 2 would be able to gather the resources that they needed. And then they would be able to move on to the next round. And then we would have a growth in our population. With that, we are also looking at that carrying capacity, those graphs. So I teach high school students. So creating and labeling and interpreting graphs is huge in the high school. That's what, I mean, that's across the board, whether you're teaching a science class, math class, and even social studies and English. We cross-curricular need to be focusing on how to read a graph and then interpret it. So creating those graphs, what we will do is also take those year 1, this is a horrible graph because I didn't put any values in, but year 1 or year 0, I had 2 in my population. We would put that, and then year 1, after that first cycle, we would then add to our population based on the resources and being able to breed. And so the students are able to see how that curve goes back. I have anywhere from, depending on the day, anywhere from 30 to 60 students that come to class. So sometimes this simulation works really, really, really well, depending on how many people come, and you can get that nice carrying capacity curve. Sometimes it completely busts out and doesn't work at all, but they get the idea of fighting for those resources, looking at these graphs. I will then bring in a graph of, I usually use the elk and the wolf population, because we also talk about elk and wolf populations later in the unit, and I'll bring those graphs in to show those carrying capacities and those how what am I trying to say? How those predator-prey relationships actually work as well. So I also bring in lots of other activities. So Project Learning Tree is actually one of the main sources I take a lot of my resources. I am just learning about Michigan Outdoor Alliance Outdoor. So this is actually, I'm glad I've stumbled upon you guys, because now I'm like, I need to go do these things. But I use what's called iTree. We talk about value of trees. We do a lot of debate on issues. So fossil fuels versus clean energy, hunting. I have many students from urban areas that hunting is like no, they think it's cruel and mean. So we do a lot of conversations about that conservation, population control. And so we'll do like a sliding scale of, agree or disagree. And then who's on the agree side, we'll actually have a conversation with the person that's on the disagree side. And I give sentence starters of, I agree with you because, or I disagree with you because, and here's my statement. And so my platform allows that. We have our own platform that we use to do that, where students can go into breakout rooms, have those conversations. They are able to get on the mic and have a conversation in the main room. I am able to have them write on the board, so I don't actually have to send them to Jamboard or a different outside resource. I have that platform that they can write on the board, right on my PowerPoint in the class, which is really nice. So my fun PowerPoint is from slidesmedia.com. I've really started to embrace the PowerPoints, the fun PowerPoints, the interactive PowerPoints. Zoom is great. I like it. It's not as interactive friendly. I know that you can write in the chat. You can do polls. I've heard there's breakout rooms. I've never used them, and then you can talk on mic, but as far as like interacting on the PowerPoint, you guys can't do that. Google Meet, I haven't used. My husband has used it in his classroom. Kind of the same thing I've heard, where you can't have them interact on the board right in the thing, so you're sending them to a different thing. But Neuro is a new thing. This is where our school is headed right now. It does have a student limit for those that don't have like a contract with a school, but lots of great tools, same things as Zoom. They can come in, have their video, and they have their mic, but they can get those writing tools. And so you can actually give them tools to be able to write on the PowerPoint, write on your whiteboard. If you ask them to write a sentence. Ellen, I didn't know that. See, please definitely teach me on that. Ellen says that PowerPoint does have an annotate feature. I didn't know that, so I'm gonna have to research that part. I haven't used Bramble, but I know that our admin are starting to kind of reach out to see how Bramble could work for us. It's kind of like a tutoring, very similar platform, but again, easy to write on the board, where you just give them tools and they can grab their tools and all that kind of stuff. Student interaction is a huge deal. ClassKick is one of the ones that our school uses heavily. I'm starting to use it more often, where kids you can give them an assignment and they do, and you can check their work right there and then and there. There's no lag in it, which is kind of nice. I know that when I was doing Jamboard, my husband was working on it and there was like a little bit of a delay. There's not a delay in the ClassKick. Padlet is good for like discussions. And then, like I said, I have Jamboard up here that I've created some things. So yeah, just a little bit of how we kind of adapt those things. It's not a perfect world. There are a lot of activities that and things that they were talking about yesterday that I'm like, how would I adapt that to the virtual world? My students are all over Michigan. We're not just in one county. We have over 1,000 students in our high school, and they are anywhere from Metro to Detroit to, we have a student from the west side in the UP, like very close to Wisconsin. So we are all over the place. So it's not something that I can send them resources, go do this. They have to be very much in the class in that virtual setting. So my timer has gone off. I did leave time for questions, comments, all that kind of stuff. So. Stop sharing. Okay, I guess if you don't have any questions, I guess I'm gonna pass it on.
All right, thank you so much, Nicole. To everybody, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Tori Reibel. I'm a new recently added Mayo board member. Mayo is the Michigan Alliance for Environmental and Outdoor Education. So Nicole, I'm really glad that you found us. Welcome to the Mayo sort of group. And with that being said, up next, we have the trials and tribulations of the Kirtland's Warbler with Bill Hodges. Bill Hodges is a teacher at Holt High School, and he is also the current Mayo Vice President. So welcome, Bill.
Hello again. Whoops, I'm a little fast here. So I heard we were going to hear about the Kirtland's Warbler, and this is a bird that most people who like birds in Michigan or spend any time outside have heard quite a bit about. It's unique to Michigan for the most part. There's a few that go to Ohio and Wisconsin, Canada, but for the most part, this bird it's a Michigander, a true Michigander, and like many Michiganders, it goes south for the winter, specifically to the Bahamas. And it's also a great success story we learned the other day, one of the first endangered species. And we heard a lot about, I guess, the trials and tribulations of trying to keep them going. So that's really, really cool. And one of the problems I was having with it is that, what activity can you do with it? And what you are going to see here is the evolution of an activity. This is like the third change of this activity for me personally. I was at Bay City, I think it was a Mayo conference, and there was a presentation on Flying Wild, which is like Project Wild, all about birds. And one of their big activities is called the Great Migration Challenge. And you have kids go around the room and they roll dice and they try to survive migration. I learned that it was okay. They had, just it wasn't as fancy as it could have been. When you went to station, it was just words. And I was at Academy of Natural Resources for a session, and a couple of gentlemen, Brian and John, they had these beautiful pictures of each station. And it was the same activity, but we were outside and they had these pictures and it was fantastic. And that's when I stole it. We got the PowerPoint with all the pictures and we did it. So I heard that Kirtland's Warbler was coming. We're going to talk about it. So I thought we need to do something about that. So this is what I've done. This is on the backs of giants. By going to these Mayo sessions, DNR sessions, I have taken the Great Migration Challenge and made it specific for the Kirtland's Warbler. And I think this is potentially very neat because I think you can do it either remote, as we're going to do it today, or you can print out the pictures and you can put them outside, or you can put them in a room and have kids walk through the station. So what we're going to do today is walk through it. If you've done the Great Migration Challenge, you'll notice many of the many of the same stations were stolen from that. I'm a teacher, so I'm a thief. I steal anything I can. And then the other thing about it is that you also see some slight differences to set it up so that you could we have to get them to the different stages. So we had to get them to to migrate down to the islands. We have to get them back up here and we have to nest. You are going to see many of the same things that we learned about the other day. So without further ado, what I've done, if we were starting this game, I've actually applied a link to it. So let's see if I can make this work. If I click on this, it's going to take me to number 4. So what I have here is a, okay, now I got to get back. Let's see if I can do that. So that's the number 4. This is an automatic generator. Okay, now I've lost this. Okay, so much for that. There we go. So maybe we'll just pick numbers randomly from now on. So station 4, if you were doing this live, you'd roll a die. I just rolled an automatic digital die. So we skip station 1. Food is plentiful. We don't do that one. Oh, there's the predator. You got to avoid the cat. We heard about the impact of cats in the first session the other day on local birds. Station 3, oh, getting chased by a hawk, that would be bad. But we went to Station 4. Oh, that's the research station. So now we have to ban you. And that's a picture of an actual Kirtland warbler being banded, which is kind of cool. And to band a person, you need some yarn, and the kid has to tie it around their legs. Now, what I love about this is I teach high school kids, and this class that I use this is 11th and 12th graders. I make them act through everything. They hate me for it, but I get great joy out of watching them hop around and tie things on their legs. And it says to move ahead 2 stations. And this is a school habitat station. And they made it to Station 6. Oh, we're going to go to the Bahamas. We are all packed up. We have a lovely little suitcase here. We're ready to go. Okay. Oops, we rolled the die. Let's say we roll a 2. So we're going to skip the polluted field and we'll go to here. Watch out, power lines. Got crawl ahead 3 stations. I'm going to highlight some of these stations we go by. Weather affects migration, strong winds, and we would go to the parking lot. Okay, we can't find our resting spot. A new shopping mall's been built. When we continue to change the lands, these migratory birds have issues. And we saw how many of these migratory birds are really struggling. The migratory songbirds, the numbers are way down. The Kirtland's warbler has been a huge success because of habitat work, but you know, they are in danger as well during this migration thing. Go ahead, 1 station. Oh, we made it to the Bahamas. Lovely place, nice little ship out there. We would roll the die again, and I'm not going to roll the die again, so I'm going to just pick a random number because that caused all sorts of chaos. But we're going to go 3 places. 1, tons of food, that's good. 2, a bad storm, you would hide, but we were going to Station 3. Oh, a great rainy season has led to many berries to feast upon. See, I find this interesting is that this bird, this Kirtland's warbler, it's a frugivore in the Bahamas mainly. It eats lots of berries, but it's an insectivore up here. And man, there's a lot of interesting things to look at. When I look at a warbler's beak, it screams insects, but you know, fruit's such a good food source. We get to move ahead 3 stations. It's nice that I picked one that was good. We got places. Some people asked some really good questions the other day about this idea of, you know, what happens to habitat destruction in the Bahamas. Is that a problem? But they tend to like the scrubby fields, but if you lose all your scrub, that would be bad. And next, okay. Oh, strange sensation. Brown racers. That's a actual predator of Kirtland's warbler there. That's a pretty good sized snake. Pretty creepy. Okay, we survived the Bahamas. Now, one of the things you'll notice is I tried to eliminate death during this portion because I wanted to get pretty far into it. And I really wanted to get back to Michigan because that's where you get to the real interesting ecology of the Kirtland's warbler, the reliance on jack pines, the parasitation of the eggs, the cowbirds being a social parasite, all that good stuff. So we roll the dice. Let's say we roll the 3 and we have winds. You can run into a communication tower. This would be the end of the bird, sadly. A glass building, apparently that's just a concussion, and keep going. Windmills, threw some windmills in here. Windmills in migration patterns have proven to be a pretty rough thing for many of these birds too, adding to the stress on them. We got good winds, so we're good to go. And we're back to northern Michigan, the jack pine forest. And this jack pine forest probably isn't the best cover. What we heard of yesterday is that you want it to be smaller trees, so there's some cover. It's a very weird bird. This is a bird that nests on the ground, but the babies are altricial. They're helpless babies. Why on the ground? That's the question I need to ask somebody because I don't like that. It seems like a bad strategy, but that's me. Okay. Well, ooh, yeah. There's some more cats again. So once again, stressing the importance of keeping your cats inside. Here we have the problem where we have a jack pine forest, but the trees are too tall. They only nest in trees of a certain class, which makes it problematic for logging that area because it's not worth that much money for loggers. So what we have here is if you don't have the right size trees, you don't get the Kirtland's warbler. And this is a pretty scary looking raccoon. I like this one. And even though the bird survives, that bird can fly away, but the nest can't. We have a forest fire, which long term would be good for regenerating the forest, but short term, you gotta find a new forest, so you go look somewhere else. It can be cold. This is just shivering. This, of course, it's Michigan. You know, I have fond memories of going up on a fishing trip in May and seeing snow. So, you know, this happens. And here's our jack pine forest. Everything's perfect, but the brown-headed cowbird, and you can see the different egg there. You know, nest parasites like that are really interesting creatures. The brown-headed cowbird used to follow the buffalo herds, and that's why they couldn't keep their own nests. But now that the herds are thinned out, they're just about everywhere. That would be unsuccessful nesting. And at the end, if the student or kid makes it to the end, you can see that proud Kirtland's warbler at the very end, and everything's you know, happy and they won. So this activity could be done with a it could be done with at a nature center very easily by posting these around outside for a group of students. It could be done in a classroom very easily. It could be inside, it could be outside, or like I said, it could be digitally done as well, which is really cool because if you can do it this way, so that when we do have problems, maybe if you have some virtual students who are doing some kind of study at the nature center, either through the school or some type of other exploration that's being done digitally, this could be done from a computer pretty easily. And it gets at this idea of the Kirtland's warbler is a really unique bird to Michigan. Obviously, what else can you do with it? Well, the beak thing, you look at that beak, man, that says insect eater to me. So how have they changed over time? Why are there so few Kirtland's warblers? There's never been that many. They've never been that widely dispersed. What's up with that? How did they become different from the other warblers? You study Michigan's birds, the warblers are kind of a pain. There's many of them, and you have to be pretty good to tell a lot of them apart. Why are there so many of them? There's just so many good different topics you could branch off on in science, just looking at these little guys. Besides their ecology, but that's really useful as well. And the dependence on the jack pine trees and a certain height, and how, you know, trying to prevent forest fires almost led to their demise. And now we have to do controlled fires, and all the work you saw yesterday about, will they be in red pines? Can we have mixed forests? How can we make it so that we can actually use that information about the bird? How can we use the information about the forest? How can we use the information about how we can make money from the forest? All these intersections socially is also very interesting. And I know, you know, all the people who have nature centers up in northern Michigan definitely talk about this bird, but it's also, I think, worth talking about just about everywhere else too. So that is the Kirtland warbler thing I put together. And I have to, like I said, John Spielis, Brian Jarsma, they're the ones who presented it last. And I'm trying to think, it may have been Tracy Page who did the workshop on flying wild way back. It was probably 10 years ago, and it may not have been. I'm too old to remember that. But that's one of the advantages of coming to Mayo, is that I get ideas from different places, different levels, and it just inspires the heck out of me. So thank you for your time. I believe we are going to take a short break.
All right, welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you. So I guess I'm going to preface this with, many of you may have seen this lab in the past. It's actually adapted from the American Modeling Teachers Association lab that's called Lazy Lizards. They also have one that is similar called Thirsty Birds. For my students in 8th grade, we spend quite a bit of time working with the Salmon in the Classroom program. And so that's how this has ended up being adapted. We kind of use our salmon as a model organism for all of the things that we talk about. And some of the things that we hear about all the time is how we've got these invasive species, and when invasive species come into an environment, there's changes that have to take place, and then adaptation has to happen. And I know yesterday we heard a little bit about how the overall Great Lakes ecosystem is changing over time. And so it really gets me processing, well, how do these organisms actually change over the time that we're talking about? It's obviously something that has to happen. All ecosystems have to continue to adapt and change, and the organisms in them have to do the same thing. So this is a lab that I use to help kids understand that. And I want to also state that in my class, I'm fully driven on the inquiry model. Like, I want my kids engaging in thinking. I want them critical thinkers. I want them looking at data, interpreting it, graphing it, and I want them drawing their own conclusions. And then when they use like kind of their student-friendly language to, hey, here's my understanding, and they assign their own kind of general term to a concept that they've discovered, then I can step in and I can say, well, actually, scientists have already come up with this term that's associated with that, and here's the term that's associated with that. And so my kids are really making those connections based on observations that they're making in the classroom. I did take, and I threw in the chat an entire link to a Google Drive that has all of the materials that you might need for this lab. It's pretty simplistic. You really only need to print off a number of cards. So I've got green cards and I've got brown cards, and you can't see the green card because I have a green screen behind me. Maybe if I hold it, no, it's not going to work. So we use cards to represent, in this case, the alleles that an organism might carry. I don't tell my kids that's what they are. I don't assign them. I just simply say, hey, here's some cards. Everyone has to have them. And there's a process that we're going to go by in order to produce the next generation. As I mentioned, I do this with 8th graders. So the talking about reproduction is not something that's too horribly difficult to get them towards. We do have to have like a general brief conversation about innuendos not being appropriate. You know, middle schoolers always seem to have innuendos that they're going to share. And then making sure that the terms that we use in the classroom are appropriate. But ultimately, they're carrying alleles, and there's a reproduction process. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to get right into the PowerPoint to keep myself on track and make sure that my time is not going too horribly long. I really struggle keeping track of time. So when I talk too long, somebody will yell at me and be like, hey, you're past your time. So I call this the Fishes Lab, again, adapted from the American Modeling Teachers Association Lazy Lizard Lab. My kids have developed a model thus far, and they've made some discoveries using a lot of other things that we've done in the past. So they know what makes something living. We've kind of come up with the characteristics of living things. They have noticed that there's differences when looking at different animals. There's variety in organisms. There's shared characteristics as well. And all organisms come from other organisms. Then we start talking about what kind of factors might influence the variety of organisms. So we talk about food, climate, temperature, competition, predation, moisture, homes, sex, time, characteristics of organisms from parents. And then evolution and adaptation is always something that kind of comes out. And I want to make sure that I really prompt my kids to delve into this idea of evolution or adaptation and ask additional questions. But ultimately, we come down to, do these factors that affect traits of the organism, or do factors that we see affect the traits of organisms? So do things like temperature in the environment, or climate, or predation, do they affect the traits that organisms are going to exhibit? And many times students are like, oh, yeah. But we really can't see that in real time. Like we don't have enough time to view it. And I say, okay, all right, well, let's do a simulation and let's see if we can observe it over a shorter period of time. And this lab could be done in a nature center in an hour period of time. In my class, I tend to run it for at least a week, because the way that I'm outlining things, I'm trying to get kids inquisitive, and it takes time to get kids to start making observations and discuss those observations as a whole group, and like pull out pieces and start developing an entire model. I posted on here too, just a general classroom description that I use on my Google Classroom as well. This lab can be used in a virtual setting, and I have been in person the entire school year, other than the short, brief period of time where the governor sent us to virtual learning. And so my kids have actually been in person, doing the lab in person. And I started envisioning, well, what if we got to this lab before we were able to return to the classroom. And my thought was I would probably have kids get all of the equipment they need at home. I would have them actively collecting data at home, and then I would put them into breakout sessions or breakout rooms that would be kind of the reproduction room. There are rules that are associated with it, and I do allow these rules to change as we're moving forward. But ultimately, these are our rules. You can collect food only with your mouth part. So every kid's getting a cup, which represents their stomach, and a straw that represents their mouth part. And ultimately, what they are doing is they are going into an environment full of water. I've got 3 different environments that I put up around the classroom. In this case, if I was doing it online, I would just tell everyone to have the same environment, and I would allow them to simply pull water out of their environment. And then we would have discussions about that. But I use 3 different types of environments. I use a regular open-ended beaker, an Erlenmeyer flask that has a narrow end to it. And then I also use large, broad pans. And all of them I put the same amount of water into. So water represents the food resource that the organism is trying to collect. And each one of the environments are represented by some different shape. And you could come up with just about any different type of environment that you want. But ultimately what the goal is, I run it at 30 seconds. You could run it at a longer period of time if you chose. The stomach must remain on the table flat. I tell my kids, you can't pick it up, you can't put it on an angle. You have to keep it flat. And you have to, I'm going to stop sharing so you guys can actually see me a little bit better. You have to pull water using your straw out of the environment, and you put it inside your stomach. And I just lifted my stomach up so I would tell my kids, oh, sorry, you've died. That's cheating. And then they go to the Well of Souls and they'll be reborn in the next generation. So yeah, it's kind of chaotic. In a pandemic, you have to be very mindful of what you're doing. I set up way more environments than I usually would in the past because I really like the competition aspect of it, because in competition, we can see the card changes over time a lot quicker. So ultimately, my kids are going to environments, they're trying to steal water or get water out of the environment, whatever that environment is. They're spread out all over the room. I allow kids at the beginning to go wherever they want. I do give them cards right off the get-go, and I specifically start just with 2 cards. I only start with the card color, the body color card. So they've got a green card or a brown card, let me rephrase. They've got 2 green cards, a green card or a brown card, and they might also have 2 brown cards. And so this would represent that idea that organisms are going to be carrying a card from each parent. And we will go through a reproduction process where they share these cards. I don't tell them really anything more than it's just the process for reproduction. In order to exchange these cards, they have to first get enough energy so that they can double their cards. So if they've got 2 brown cards, they then get 4 brown cards. If they ended up with 2 green cards, then they get 4 green cards. If they had a green card and a brown card, then they get 2 green cards and 2 brown cards. And then our high feeders in this scenario, in this simulation, will be the ones that get to choose their partner first for reproduction. And that kind of guides this process of changes in the cards over time. Ultimately, it's your cards represent whether you're a green fish or whether you are a brown fish. And I throw in some environmental changes over time as well. So I might say, hey, we've got an invasive species that showed up in the environment. And that invasive species is doing a really good job of picking out the brown fish in the environment. Like they see them way better. And so brown fish, I'm really sorry. If you're brown in color, we're going to have to limit the amount of time that you're feeding, because you're just not able to go out and feed as much as all the other ones because you're not very camouflaged. And so as we go through generation after generation and after generation of reproduction with this lab, what we see is slowly we get lower and lower frequencies of brown cards in the population. When reproduction takes place, once I've doubled my cards and I go find my partner, I tell kids, you just got to take your cards, put them behind your back, face your partner, put 1 card down on the table. Your partner is going to put 1 card down on the table, and that's going to be either you or your partner in the next generation. One of the things kids really struggle getting over is that they're not really them, they are the next generation. And that's something you have to expressly state to students like, hey, you're not you anymore, you're actually your offspring. And so because they'll want to be like, well, I changed color. Well, no, you didn't change color. Your offspring is now a different color. And so my kids will actually start putting this data in and graphing this information. I'm going to share my screen one more time here. I know I'm running close on time. Kind of went through those rules really quickly, but I take and I actually build some charts for kids to put data in. And I tell them, actually, I put the data in it. I tell them I'm going to be collecting data on every single individual in the entire class. In your lab notebook, in this case, we use digital lab notebooks this year. I want you to keep track of some type of data that you are collecting regarding you or your group. So if you're in a small environment where there's lots of people, maybe keep track of what's happening in that environment, or just keep track of what's happening to you in the environments you go to. Did I go to an Erlenmeyer flask environment, and how much water did I get out each time I went to that environment? When I changed to a different environment, did I get more water out? And so I have kids actively keeping data so that when these conversations start taking place in the classroom where they're becoming inquisitive as to why things happen, they can go back into their data and they can say, well, this is what happened at like generation number 2 or generation number 3 when I was collecting food, and here's what happened. And then you'll see a couple other kids will be like, they'll look back in their notebook and be like, oh, that happened to me too. And so maybe we're starting to develop some evidence to explain the why for what was occurring. And so I've got an example that I threw in there too, as far as like kids putting stuff in. So here's just general information about what was happening with the colored cards, the number of kids that had those cards at that generation. I try to evenly distribute them to begin with. And then over time, we start noticing change. And kids at some point will eventually be like, well, does it really matter that you have a brown card and a green card? Because you told us earlier that if you just simply had a brown card, you were brown in color. And so we'll have a great conversation about, well, biologists really can't see that a lizard is, or in this case, a fish is carrying a brown card. All they know is that it must be carrying a brown card because it's brown in color. And so maybe it doesn't necessarily matter that you have a brown card and a green card. Maybe all that matters is your color. And kids will start saying, well, maybe we only need to keep track of the fish in the population that have brown color and the fish in the population that have green color, and then we can see what the change is over time. And then they start talking about percentages, and I get middle school kids that do this all the time. They're like, wait a minute, well, maybe we just need to know the percentage of the population that's carrying a specific color. And so I've actually developed some charts where it's kind of pulling out the data from the first tab, where it breaks down the percentages. And so I can say, well, interestingly, I have all of this data for you, and we can dig in and we can look at that. And well, if you're a green and a brown carded lizard, you're actually a brown, or in this case, fish. I keep going back to lizards because for years and years and years, I've used this lab as the Lazy Lizard Lab. Green and brown are still just brown individuals. And so we've got 36% plus 31%. So the population has that percentage. And what we see is over time, we are starting to get changes in those percentages, changes in the population over time. And so this is a great tool for me to lend into conversations about natural selection, adaptation, evolution, getting into genes, allele frequencies, alleles in general, genetics, like the whole gamut is here in this lab. So as a classroom teacher, it's great for me, but those of you that are sitting and educating people coming into nature centers and stuff, this could be kind of a cool lab where you set up kind of a general auditorium type area where you've got a bunch of little stations set up and people can kind of play the game or simulate the game. I know I took quite a bit of time there. I think I'm right at the deadline. I'm going to stop sharing here. If you have questions, feel free to throw it into what we got on the chat, and I can answer as we go, or shoot me an email. I'll throw my email in the chat as well.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. So next we have, and I'm so sorry if I say your name wrong, please correct me, Cass Arsenal from the E.L. Johnson Nature Center, and she will be talking to us about experiential learning, wolf and moose count. Welcome, Cass.
Oh boy. How y'all doing today? I am going to be showing you a simulation that we do with our 5th grade students from Bloomfield Hills Schools. I'm going to share my screen now. And here is a link to the presentation. Give me a moment. I'm not the best with Zoom. I'll share it at the end because I'm confused with the present part. All right. So this is an outdoor activity that we do with our students. If you are familiar with Michigan Tech University, they do a volunteer program and also a teacher program where they get people to help support the wolf moose counts. They are doing a 2021, so they're doing it this year, and there is registration available for teachers. I'll put that link in the chat at the end as well. This program we do is all day long outside, and we do it in the winter time because of the tracks that we see on site. So on the presentation is just a little bit of information about the program length and the group sizes. This is kind of what the simulation looks like at one of our stations. And it's just taking stakes to represent wolf, moose populations, and then also kill sites. And so I have on this presentation links to the data sheet we use, the Animal Tracks Field Guide, which is super helpful, and it is on the DNR website. They have 4 different animal tracks. So under their nature school website, the DNR has those field guide tracks. I know that someone else, I think John shared it in the first presentation in a different one. So that's what the internet is successful at doing, is giving us a lot of resources. And also what about John's presentation that I really liked is the literacy component that you can showcase when you do science. So those are always connected. So this would be a great adaptation for that. The literacy component, and then doing some tracks that he was showcasing. So how this works is that we share with the students that the stakes simulate different animals and different activities of those animals. So we put out brown stakes that represent wolves, moose stakes. One moose stake represents 10 moose, and then a red stake, which represents a kill site. And then we set up different scenes that would be out in nature that have been observed. So a herd of moose, so we'd have a bunch of a bunch of black stakes out there. We would have different behaviors that wolves have in packs or individually, and we would have kill sites. And so the next slide is a couple examples of what it would look like out in the field. So scene 1 would be a bunch of black stakes that represent moose. And so remember, each stake represents 10 moose. And then we would have our brown stakes, and you notice how they're in a line. So when the students observe this scene, because again, we're just walking along, they are the field researchers, so they are doing the data. We're walking along and they spot this scene. And so that's where we talk about it. And it's all about having those conversations with students about their observations and what they think is happening. So it's a bunch of I wonder questions that are going on. Now, mind you, when we do this activity, sometimes the kids don't see the stakes. So I don't stop. I continue going because I'll share at the end why I do that. But again, it's all about the I wonder questions and then making observations from this simulation. Here's another example of a scene that we do. So the red stake is a kill site. So a moose has been killed and the animal pack is surrounding it. But then we also put a stake, a brown wolf stake to the side to ask the students why we see the scene that we've seen. Some answers can be, well, that is the alpha, and the alpha has already eaten all that he or she has eaten. So then the rest of the wolf pack can consume it. Or the students say, well, maybe that wolf is in trouble and they're being punished. And so you get a really great discussion with the students about wolf behavior. So a little bit of information that I do want to share is kind of the extra stuff that's involved. So we have 2 separate trails for this and 4 different groups that do it. So we have groups go in opposite directions for each trail. And that's again to collect data and share that data. So again, if a group misses a scene, we just keep going. And that's to show the importance of collecting data and having observations. So again, that's why I don't stop at each scene. I let the kids drive the observations. Again, I'm showing you the animal tracks, but also since we do this simulation in the wintertime, you have to make sure that you put out your stakes before the soil thaws. So keep that in mind. Have extra writing utensils handy because since it's cold, most of the participants will be wearing gloves, and holding on to a writing utensil with gloves, it's hard to do. So have the writing utensils handy. And of course, you have to consider weather conditions, when to commit to continuing a program and when to reschedule a program. So I also wanted to share with you, since we do this for a 4-hour program, we do a second activity indoors, which is the track scenes activity. And so this is where we have a simulation of 4 different scenes that we have created. And the students in small groups of 2 to 3, no more than 3, as we as teachers know that the more students in a small group setting, the more likely more students won't be participating. So we do 4 different scenes. Here's an example of one of those scenes where we have cottontail rabbit tracks, we have fox tracks, we have cottontail scat. There's their shelter. We've created a scene where the fox has hunted and grabbed the rabbit that tried to get into the shelter. And again, the link for this presentation will be in a moment. But here is all the optional artifacts to continue the track scenes. And this is really easy to have in a container and keep it all there, and then just unfold the canvas and get that started with the indoor activity. This is especially helpful if you're doing the simulation outside for the wolf moose count and you don't see any tracks because maybe the snow hasn't accumulated on the ground. Here's another example, and I think somebody shared that when they had their students collect the tracks that they found tracks of an animal that had grabbed of a raptor or some type of bird that had grabbed their prey. So we have an example of that here with the feathers and then the imprint. There's an owl pellet. So again, this is another scene. This is one of my favorite scenes. And the reason why is because we added an antler that has gnaw marks on it. So that is another thing of evidence of what animal is using a shelter. Because not only do we have the tracks and the scat, but we have the gnaw marks as well. Here is a third scene of that activity and the students collecting the data. So I wanted to share with you that. Activity 3 that we do inside is a skull analysis, where we have different skulls set up for students to do those observations. Because again, we are asking them to be wildlife field researchers. So a part of that is skull analysis. So on the tables around the classroom, we have different skulls. It represents difference in diet. It represents teeth and what they would eat. It represents where the eyes are. So it showcases all those different life science things. The other two activities we do in the afternoon is we do owl pellets. So we do an owl pellet dissection. And we also do How Wolves Change Rivers, which is a really great short 4 or 5 minute video on how when wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone, how they themselves as a keystone species help support the rivers and the ecosystem there. So we do that as well. Of course, I wanted to share with you the standards that this is for grade 5, but this program can be adapted for any age. And then I also wanted to showcase another really great resource for guidelines, which is National North American Association of Environmental Educators and their K through 12 guidelines. So they have strands that help support the scientific process and the sciences in their strands. So I wanted to share that with you all. There's a link also in that. There's my contact information. And when I stop sharing the screen, I can give you the link to this presentation. Does anybody have any questions? There is a link to that, and then a link to the Wolf Moose Research Summit. Let me find that. There, I think I got it all. Thank you all. I appreciate all of your time. And if you have any questions, again, my link is in the Google Slide. I hope I've shared all the links correctly so that you can see all those Google Docs and use them. Again, we're educators and we take things and we use them. So.
Thank you, Cass. Next, we're going to go back to John Gray. We are going to listen about living with white-tailed deer. John Gray is a retired school teacher and a past Mayo board member. Welcome again, John.
Good morning again. My second presentation today is another program I've used in the past, and this one's called Living with White-tailed Deer. This is the DVD resource for it, but I'm going to kind of go through it on a PowerPoint so you can see some of the okay. So Living with White-tailed Deer is a program that was put out by Quality Deer Management, QDMA, and it kind of deals with a problem that Chad was talking about yesterday, which is the management of Michigan's deer population. Michigan has 1.75 million deer as of 2019 in the state of Michigan. And obviously those deer are in areas where they shouldn't be, where people aren't tolerating them. There is a difference between a biological carrying capacity and a cultural carrying capacity. Just because the land can sustain the animals in a biological care capacity doesn't mean that humans are able to survive living with them comfortably, which is the cultural carrying capacity. And white-tailed deer have been very uncanny in adapting to their environment and new environments, and allow them to be able to live in a suburban and even urban areas where they can be a problem because there's no natural predators to control their population. So I'm going to show what I'm going to do is try to intersperse the videos from the program that's living with white-tailed deer, and the PowerPoint with some explanation of what some of the stuff is. So I want to show, I'm going to show a quick video clip that comes from the little foreshadowing. All right, so this is the clip that comes from the very beginning of the video and kind of gets the kids interested in what the problem is. Let me start this. All right, let me share my screen and we'll go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so this is just a kind of a quick cartoon. And this is typically what happens when people move into an area that have deer. They think it's great and that's why they move there. And then once they get there and they find out that those deer actually can be problematic, then all of a sudden it's a problem for them. And they need to figure out some way to deal with this problem. And you're seeing this in a lot of suburban areas. The problem is that as people are moving into traditional ranges for the deer and building houses and subdivisions and cities, the white-tailed deer aren't pushed out by this activity, they're actually adapting to it. So they end up being in people's backyards, on the golf courses, eating their ornamentals, getting hit by cars on their streets, and it creates a big problem. And so the activity is to have your students try to solve this problem of too many white-tailed deer in a suburban setting. How do you deal with this problem and satisfy as many of the stakeholders as possible? You have a lot of special interest groups that are interested in the deer population, either wanting a larger population such as hunters, or a smaller population such as insurance companies because of rising costs of car deer accidents, farmers because of crop damage. So there's a lot of people that have a stake in what the population of the deer is. And you have to try to figure out how to solve this problem. So I'm going to switch back to the video and show you a section of that. That kind of addresses what the problem is. And again, this is all contained in the video or in the packet that you would get if you had this
home range. They too can suffer nutritionally compared to healthy wild whitetails in similar but well-balanced ecosystems. Extreme overpopulation in any species also forecasts the threat of disease and starvation.
The video is hosted by Shane Mahoney.
Once the deer
You might
consume
recognize his
native
voice.
plants in their range, their appetites quickly adapt to neighborhood gardens, shrubbery, and flower beds. Usually browsing from the cover of darkness, they forage through the yards of their human neighbors, feeding at will. Costly fencing offers some protection. Still, the whitetails find a way to fill their stomachs. Overabundant whitetails also bring something else to neighborhoods. Deer play host to the deer tick that carries Lyme disease, the second fastest growing infectious disease in America. Serious in humans. Exposure to this tick-borne disease can increase in areas with high deer densities. Booming urban deer populations can also be seen along our roadways. Without predators or hunting to help control their numbers, car-deer collisions become the prime controlling factor. Costly and tragic to victims on both sides, car-deer collisions claim 1 million animals and over 100 humans on our highways each year. Faced with the problems of urban habitat damage, mounting car-deer collisions, and the increased threat of disease, more and more communities are forced to confront their deer dilemma. Troubled communities often seek the assistance of citizen groups and professionals in developing solutions to their deer problems. Many communities form wildlife management advisory committees to help develop a deer management plan for the welfare of the community, ecosystem, and the deer. These advisory committees are typically made up of various interest groups, each with their own point of view. The citizens who make up these groups have different backgrounds and motives concerning the deer issue.
I don't think so.
But they realize their obligation to contribute to a long-term management solution that's in the best interest of their community. Of course, they each perceive different value systems and risk factors in developing a plan. Most base their position on a blend of emotion and scientific data. It is important to remember that each group has a valid position that should be considered in developing a deer management solution. This complex process of involving a variety of interest groups is actually occurring in communities across the United States, as white-tailed deer take the center stage in the growing problem of wildlife overabundance.
All right. So the problem is that deer are taking over suburban areas. So the activity is a kind of a town hall meeting. Students take on the role of special interest groups and come up with a solution to the problem. So they have to basically learn about the group that they're representing. And when I did this, I tried to put in, if I knew that there were kids that were hunters, I tried to put them in the groups that were non-hunters, the animal welfare groups. And people that were against hunting, I tried to put them in the groups that were the prone hunting conservation groups. So you put the students into different groups and you show them the video, part of what I just showed. This has a quiz that you can print out ahead of time to give to the kids while they're watching it. I hate to give a video, have them watch a video when they're not doing something to show that they're paying attention. So this has to put in information that they learned from the video. Special interest groups, you have 6 different groups, the park officials, professional wildlife, Citizens for Biodiversity, Conservation Association, Animal Welfare Group, and the Homeowners Association. Each one of these groups has an interest in controlling the population, and a idea of how the best way would be to control that population. They get information about the problem that they have. In this case, you have a city that's got a biological carrying capacity of 30 deer per square mile, and the current density is 130 deer per square mile. So you have 400 deer too many for the area that they have to control or work with. So what they're trying to do is come up with a solution on how they can reduce this number down to a manageable population, and what method they would use. And they have a budget. They have different methods. You can give them this information, but some of this is kind of old. Better to let them do some research on their own to try to figure out the best way to be able to control it and what the current cost would be.
John, we aren't seeing the screen if we're supposed to be seeing it. We're just seeing the video.
Oh, you're still, I'm sorry. Better?
Yes.
Okay. So here we go. This is the video quiz handout that you would give the students when they are watching the video so they can answer questions. This again are the 6 different special interest groups that your students are going to represent when they do their research. Key facts, the information on the deer herd in this fictitious town. Again, 400 deer too many, and you have to try to figure out how to get that number down to a reasonable amount. So the numbers here aren't necessarily current for the cost of controlling deer population. So you may have to have the students do some research on their own to get some key or some current figures. Also, there aren't anything in there like fencing and some of the other options that they may come up with that aren't listed here. So they would have to be able to do that activity on their own. This is what the information that they're trying to figure out when they do their research. What is your management plan? How much it's going to cost? How long is it going to take to accomplish this goal? What are the risks? How are other special interest groups going to be affected? And I tell the students that the best way to do it is to try to come up with a plan that is going to be acceptable by the most number of special interest groups. You're not going to be able to please everybody, but your goal is to try to please as many people as possible. And then you have a town hall meeting where you present this information to the rest of the class as your group. So your group gives their viewpoint, you keep track of all of it, you know, how much it costs and how long it's going to take and how effective it's going to be. And then you record all this on the board, and then the students do a vote of what their solution would be, what they think the best one would be based on the information that they were given by their classmates. So the second part of the video has, the first part tells the viewpoint of different special interest groups. So you get some actual video of people talking about what their concerns are. And then after they do the research, the second part of the video gives them a chance to look at communities that have had this problem and how they've solved it. So there's a number of different examples, running out of time now, but one of them, it's kind of nice because a lot of this was filmed actually in Michigan. So one of the examples was how they dealt with the population in the Huron Metro Parks. And they interviewed some park officials and somebody from the MUCC at the time. Again, this is an older program. And you get a chance to see how the students' solutions compare with ones that have actually been done and whether they've been successful or not. So some of you may think that this looks familiar, and you may not be able to get your hands on this program, this preprint program. So there is an activity that you can do from Project Wild called Deer Dilemma. And if you've got a Project Wild book, you can find the activity in there. Or I went online and they've got these printed that you can print out. This is essentially the roll cards. So this is basically doing the same thing of the special interest groups that you're assigning, but you assign these different roles to the kids to do research and then present it at a town hall meeting. Again, the problem is too many deer in a suburban setting. And here's some of the ways that you can take care of it: hunting, professional sharpshooters, birth control, relocation, introduce predators, or to do nothing and let the population on its own. And resources, the Quality Deer Management Association puts this out, deerassociation.com. Unfortunately, their store right now is down. It's supposed to be up February 15th, so you may be able to buy this at that time. It's about, I think it was $30 when I bought this program. And then Project Wild basically is where you can find the Deer Dilemma. And then down at the bottom is my email if you need to contact me. Okay, that's about it. I know I went over just a little bit, but that's
okay. Thank you so much, John. Up next, we have Eve Choi from Frederick Meyer Gardens, and she is going to talk to us about the activity Bee Dance.
Hi, everyone. My name's Eve Choi, and I'm the curator of horticultural and environmental education at Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park. Excited to talk with you guys today. I tried to keep this short and sweet, so I'm going to try to make sure that we're able to go to our break time. Today, I'm going to talk about Bee Dance, which is an on-site activity that's hosted at our children's garden. But then if I do have some time, I'd like to show you some of the virtual resources that we have available for free for all for classrooms and families. So before we begin, if you look down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you see a reactions page, or you see a reactions button. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you have heard of Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park before? Because I want to give a little bit of a setting. All right, so it looks like maybe we have had some people visit us before. Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park is a sculpture park and botanic garden located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We have 158 acres, which has helped us a lot during COVID. We have 5 indoor themed gardens, and then we have several outdoor gardens. One of those outdoor gardens is the Lena Meyer Children's Garden, where this activity is hosted. The Lena Meyer Children's Garden has a lot of self-guided opportunities, many different themed areas, a treehouse, log cabin, a rock quarry where children can learn more about fossils, and a sense garden. And in the children's garden, again, we have a lot of options for self-guided exploration, but then we also have discovery carts where we will host activities, and the Bee Dance is one of those activities. And ideally, it's guests are meant to interact at these carts for maybe 10 to 15 minutes at most. And we also use these as activities or launching points for some of our other programming. So what I'm going to do today is talk about, again, Bee Dance, which takes place in the Kids Sense Garden. This garden in particular invites guests and children to engage all of their senses in the garden experience. We obviously, the picture in the bottom right-hand corner was taken pre-COVID. We have had to include a lot of cleaning protocols in our outdoor spaces, but with the Lena Meyer Children's Garden, out of all of our educational programming at Meyer Gardens, the programming hosted in the Children's Garden was the least impacted because we were able to, with increased sanitation protocols and then just making some adjustments for distancing and removing shared materials, we were able to host a lot of our programming this summer. So that's, we were excited to use that space. And I get to talk to you guys today about Bee Dance. This discovery cart, again, it's hosted outside, but this could be done in a classroom. This activity could lend itself to a number of different environments. and it can be used as a precursor to a lot of other extension topics, and I'll talk to you about that at the end. But bee dance focuses on how honeybees dance to tell other bees where nectar is located. So I've got the learning objectives on the board, so we focus on that. We also focus on exploring body movement as a form of communication and understanding natural patterns, and then highlighting beneficial characteristics of bees with a focus on their role as important pollinators. Now in the children's garden, our activities are geared for children ages 10 and under. And with these different activities, there are extensions to bring it up to an older audience, but typically the guests and students and classes that we have come out are elementary age and early childhood. So what I have right now on the board is a picture of how this is set up on one of our discovery carts. So we use yellow rubber circles, which I've got an example of one right here, and yellow arrows to mark out the dance. And I apologize, I think I actually pulled up an old version of this PowerPoint. I had a slide with a video of a honeybee doing this dance in the hive. I've got some images that I can show you here, but I'll send that link along with resources. But so I'll take a step back. So what this discovery cart illustrates is how honeybees use body movement to communicate the location of nectar sources. So this was actually discovered by, one second. Carl von Frisch won the Nobel Prize in 1979 for his work on bee communication. In his early experiments, he placed honeybee hives in an area with only one nectar feeder for bees to collect from, and watched the behavior of the honeybees inside. He noticed a waggling behavior, so I've got a little bee here. So he noticed the waggling behavior, and then dances that but he noticed that behavior within the hive and traced and measured this behavior throughout the day. From this, he saw that they changed the angle of their dance at the same rate that the sun moved throughout the day. And from this, he discovered that bees were using the dance to indicate where the sugar feeder was located relative to the sun. Continued work showed that this bee dance also communicated distance based on what type of dance the bees performed, but there's still just so much more to learn about this behavior. I have an example of one of the dances that we lay out with the poly spots and arrows at the bottom of this screen, where you see the circle, the yellow circles with the red bullseye. The children we give the kids, pre-COVID, we would give them a cape to wear. During COVID, we have enough of these bee puppets that we would give a child a bee puppet to hold, and then they would act out the dance after learning more about this process. And these would be sanitized, each one would be sanitized and then left out to dry in between uses of this cart. So they would go follow the arrows. When they got on a poly spot, they do a waggle dance and continue through. Again, very, very cute for the little ones, but also engaging body movement into learning exercises is just another way to help make the content stick. So with this, the materials that you would need are just rubber circles and arrows. You could probably use different materials depending on whether you were outside or inside and what you had available. Laminated instructions for the different dances. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. so that I can show you these pictures, because I apologize. So we have these images of, this is the round dance, which is actually used to communicate when a nectar source is closer to the hive. And then we have the waggle dance, which is that is used to communicate when the nectar source is further from the hive. And then for older students, we also can discuss this is backwards for you guys, so I apologize. You'll get this in the resources, but if you can imagine this mirror image, we talk more about that angle. We talk more about the angle of the bees, dance, and how that is used to indicate the distance of the food source from the hive, and the angle, they use the angle of their dance to indicate the direction, and then the duration of the dance also communicates distance. So we have, I'll send this information. Oh, it's not backwards for you guys. Thank you. It was backwards for me. So I appreciate that, that it wasn't as convoluted for you guys. Oh, there was a great question. What's the difference between the yellow and blue arrows? There isn't really. It's more just for visual. They're just two-sided. There's no difference between those. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. I want to share some resources that we used to develop this activity. And with the honeybees, we will use this activity as a launching point to kind of do some compare and contrast, talking about, a lot of kids know about honeybees. That's something that's familiar to them. So we'll introduce this as a launching point to kind of do a compare and contrast, learning about our Michigan native bees and the importance of those as pollinators. Sometimes we'll pair this activity with a pollination activity where we have Velcro belts that and buckets with little pom-poms by different flowers, and children will get activity challenge cards where they have to go collect pollen from one flower and drop it off in the bucket by another flower. We also pair this with a honeybee weekend that we do at our Michigan's Farm Garden, which is outside of the children's garden. And we also use this as part of our Science Sunday and Garden Helpers summer programming. So we've used this a lot of times. We use this activity as a component of a number of different larger educational programs. So some great resources for not only honeybees, but also Michigan pollinators in general. I would highly suggest taking a look at the Michigan Pollinator Initiative. For more information on bee communication, you can go to that ASU link. It also has the video that I was going to share, and some images as well. The Michigan's Beekeeper Association is a great resource. We work closely with the Grand Rapids area beekeepers for our honeybee demonstrations. And if I have time, I want to show you our remote learning resources. So these are, this is at meyergardens.org. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see, are you guys seeing the website right now, or are you still seeing my PowerPoint?
We're seeing the website.
Perfect. Okay. So on our virtual remote learning resources page, we have several lesson plans that can be used. They are standards aligned. We highlight those. We highlight any curriculum connections. We give a suggested age range. There's a number of topics that are science related and art related. So while the bee dance, that was an example of an activity that we do on site, we have built out a number of virtual resources to try to still remain relevant and try to meet some of those needs of the community. We also have story time resources for early childhood. And then we also have some virtual field trips that we have developed. And we were able to get permission to take scholarship money that typically would go towards transportation, since we're not having as many groups come here for transportation. We were able to move that to the scholarship fund for these virtual field trips. So for qualifying school districts, scholarships can be used to cover the full cost of our virtual field trips. And that's available for Title I schools in which 40% or more of students meet the federal guidelines and qualifications for additional supportive services. So contact us. We're trying to provide lots of free educational resources as we can. And then we also have these virtual field trips available. So that is my discussion. I know I went a little bit over into our break, but if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email at echoi@meyergardens.org about our virtual resources, our programming in the Children's Garden, or how we've adapted programming to COVID. There's been a lot of pivoting this year, as we all have been doing. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eve. So welcome back. We are going to welcome Bill Hodges back again. He's going to talk about Great Lakes food webs and invasive species, fun with blocks. Again, Bill is our current Mayo Vice President and a teacher at Holt High School. He was actually my teacher when I went to Holt High School. So welcome back, Bill.
Thank you, Tori. All right. Let me share my screen. So I wanted to get out of my comfort zone. I'm a classroom teacher, and I was trying to think like a nature center person. And instead of thinking about having a captive audience, I thought I have kids for, I don't know, a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. I have to engage them. And I need to teach them something important. And obviously the Great Lakes impacts everybody in the state of Michigan. And I live in Lansing area, and the Lansing area is about as far away from any Great Lakes as possible. So, but everybody else is closer, and you all have your lake. And the other day we saw some really great presentations, specifically on Lake Huron and Lake Erie, and about how the food web has changed. And when I look at it as an educator, I think to myself, wow, there's a lot of NGSS standards all the way through elementary, middle, and high school on food webs. And invasive species are a great topic with those, because they divert the food web. They make it change over time. So what we're going to talk about today, I thought about if I had 10 minutes, if I had 15 minutes with an audience, I don't have my captive audience for an hour at a time, how would I teach them how food webs work and invasive species, building on the stuff we saw the other day? So that was my thought going into it, so that you know what I think. And it's, in my head, it's kind of a scary place sometimes. But why Great Lakes? It's place-based. I have salmon in the classroom. I've been doing it for about 20 some years. Saw Jeremy also does it in some other places, so it ties in nicely to that. My ecosystem I choose is Lake Michigan, because our watershed, the Grand River, feeds into it. But we know that any watershed would work, obviously, because they all end up in the Great Lakes if you're in Michigan. It's really nice. You don't even have to use the Great Lakes. Any lake ecosystem is phytoplankton, zooplankton, small fish, big fish. That is how it works in a lake system. It's a little weird in a river where you have fungus eating leaves and stuff like that, but we're not going to worry about that right now. But that's the basic concept. So you can use this just about anywhere. And it's also a good opportunity to tie in the role of the DNR and dangers of invasives. Sea lampreys are a great poster child. There's a Project Slime. They let us bring lampreys into the classroom, which is way more wow factor than I deserve as a teacher. And most kids have experienced zebra mussels too. So when you think about invasives and food webs, there's a lot of bang for your buck as far as getting people interested, and also the importance of how things work. I want to show you just real quick this isn't even all the things you could tie into, but when you look at food webs and things that you can do, elementary school, middle school, high school, there's a ton of stuff. And I like the fact that food webs can be tailored up or down to your clientele. And that's what I was thinking about with this. So my basis for anything, when we talk about Great Lakes food webs, is if you go to NOAA, I'm going to go on to the Great Lake, the Lake Michigan one, hopefully. My computer is slow. NOAA has great food webs for each of the Great Lakes, and they're all slightly different. And because of that, wherever you are based, you can find the food web that goes there. Personally, I use the Lake Michigan one. I take out the new invasives. I take out the lamprey. I take out salmon, which is not an invasive, but an exotic species. And this isn't coming up at all. Oh, here we go. Wow. I'm going to kill my son. He's probably playing video games using my Wi-Fi upstairs. If you haven't been exposed to these, this is the Lake Michigan one. And they also tell you details about each of these things. But you have your basic food web. You have your algae at the bottom. You have your zooplankton, mollusks come in here. You have your small fish, and then you have your big fish. And personally, when I use this with kids, I've actually made little cards with these fish. I do the 1950s, 1940s food web. So there's no salmon, there's no sea lamprey, there's no goby, there's no quagga mussels. But then we introduce those things to it to see things change. And I'm happy that I'm focusing on Lake Michigan because you heard Lake Huron and Lake Erie, and they have completely different stories. I don't know if completely different is the right word, but they have different stories. My kids, when they go to a Great Lake, they go to Lake Michigan. So that's why we focus on this. And it's also the story of the introduction of salmon from the, sea lamprey wiped out all the lake trout. And we introduced salmon for a sports fishery first, but then they also help take care of the overabundance of small fish. But I wanted to show you this. If you don't know these, every Great Lake has their food web like this, and you can cut them out and do stuff. But I don't have that kind of time. I have kids in a nature center, and I need to teach them about food webs really quickly. So we're gonna go right to that. And before I show you what the interactive part of this, I guess, what I try to teach my kids is this idea that only 10% of the energy from one trophic level goes up to the next level. The rest gets lost as heat. So 10%, 10%, 10%, 90% lost is heat. And that's kind of a difficult concept. Why heat? Well, when you think of it, we are burning food, and all the food that you eat does not stay with you. If I ate a pound of food a day and all that food stayed with me, I would gain 365 pounds a day. You burn it for energy. Now, it's easy to think of warm-blooded things burning it because we give off heat. That's the heat thing. But even cold-blooded things, they are burning the food. And when you burn it, eventually the end game is heat. And this explains why if only 10% goes up, you have a lot fewer secondary, tertiary, quaternary consumers. The energy gets lost, and not all the energy goes up. So I wanted a way to show this. So I was playing around and in my room, my classroom that is, with something that was a present for my kids. And it's like, what should I use? What can I do this? And I was thinking, why don't we play with blocks? Because I like playing with toys. I have an English teacher friend who's convinced I can't teach because he's convinced that everything science teachers do, we just have better toys than English teachers. My guitar teacher, so I can't say too much. So, see if we can see. Oh, see, I knew this was going to happen too. Okay, so what we have here is a food pyramid. And I apologize for the lack of artistic talent, but on the base of my food pyramid, I have phytoplankton, I have little zooplankton dudes, including a little mussel. I have some small fish, and these are supposed to be lake trout up on the top, because that's where I do my my work, is what happens to the lake trout. What's nice about this is that you have a limited amount of what you can do with it. You can't balance more things magically. And this will allow you a lot of flexibility when talking to kids, at whatever level. Maybe you ask the question, how can we get more lake trout? You can't just put a lake trout up here. There's no support for it. To support more of the top of the food web, we need to support the base. And if you support the base, if you have more algae, of course I put it on that side because you have more algae, you can have more zooplankton. If you have more zooplankton, we can have some more of the smaller fish. And if you have more smaller fish, you might have another top consumer. And all of a sudden, you can see how this would be supported. But what happens? What happens if a lamprey comes? Oh yes, I do a lamprey. And you wipe out all the lake trout. What's gonna happen there? And what's gonna happen is that nothing's eating these guys. Now we have problems because these guys show up and now, oh no, there's no support. And if there's no support, this is going to collapse because these guys go away. There's no food. They eat all their food. And now you have all the dead fish on the Lake Michigan beaches. Let's see if we can get back to where we were. And there's all sorts of places to tie in depending on your ecosystem. The other day, oops. We talked about the zebra mussels and the effect that the zebra mussels had on taking out both zooplankton and phytoplankton. If these things go away, you can try taking them away. Oh, that was pretty amazing. What's going to happen is you're going to have a collapse of the system and the collapse of the fishery. And you can play with this quite a bit with kids, and it's a real nice visual. Now, I don't like one part of it. It's not the 10% rule. 10% of the energy goes up. It's really not 10%. However, it does do a nice job just showing that you need to have more at the bottom than the top. That's why it's a food pyramid. And they've learned food pyramids in their health classes about what they should be eating, but they haven't learned about what happens to the food web. You can add salmon to the system to stabilize it when the lake trout went away. This is how I would use it. Having more time, we use like laminated cards to manipulate it, but I think I'm going to use these little guys for the idea of just to review it. What would happen if we have too many of one level? And it's going to show that the whole thing collapses. And that's what happens with our Great Lakes and invasive species. Obviously, you can go lots of places with it. And that's that, the details goes forever and ever with these food webs because they're very complicated. Now, does it have to be an aquatic system? Nope, doesn't have to be an aquatic system. If I was running a nature center, I would take whatever ecosystems I have available to me. You could have a field, you could have a forest, you could have pond systems, and you could have different ecosystems, and you could have kids manipulate these as much as you want. And that would be really neat to see what they would come up with. Maybe you have them make their own. Maybe they can make their own blocks if you had blocks like this. The reason I have these blocks, which is intriguing to me, my father's an excellent woodworker, but he bought these at an art show for 15 bucks. I have a whole cart of these blocks that I use for surface area volume stuff, and I'm getting a lot of mileage out of them. It was much cheaper for him to buy than to make, lazy butt. But the idea, it's very visual if you have for 15 minutes. But if you have for more than 15 minutes, you can obviously have whole food webs made from the NOAA cards as well. So let me go back to share with you. So why do I like this activity? I think it's real flexible. If you are talking to kids who are older, you can talk about that 10% of the energy goes up, 90% gets lost. If it's younger kids, this explains the age-old question. This is what I always tell kids. I go, look outside your window. Do you see more grass or more bunny rabbits? Well, you see more grass. Do you see more bunny rabbits or coyotes? And this idea should make sense to them based on their own personal experiences, but this really does a nice job visualizing this. All sorts of topics. We have energy flow. We have the biomass, how it goes down as you go up, the trophic levels. But you can also do a lot of human effect on the food web. I focus on invasive species with lampreys and zebra mussels and things like that. New invasive species, what could it do to it? But the reality is you could do climate change. What would that do to a food web? You could do humans effects on a food web. If you're talking about a field near your house, what happens if it turns into a agricultural lot? What will happen? If you have enough kids and enough blocks, you could have them at different stations and they could present out, where you have ones doing aquatic ecosystems, you could have doing terrestrial ecosystems. It could be adapted just about anywhere and could be local. And I think the local thing is really important. I want these kids to I want them to be focused on where they're at, because once they learn to love where they're at, they will go on from there. And there is the limitation though, that only, it doesn't show the 10% literally, but it's pretty good. So it's a neat idea, it's visual, and it's pretty quick and easy to make. So I thought that would be an easy bang for your buck activity. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bill. And up next for our last activity, we have Kevin Fraley from the DNR, and he's going to talk to us about his activity, Mammal Mayhem.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, good. So I wanted to kind of take a spin off of the summit yesterday when we spent a lot of time talking about mammals. You heard a lot of biologists give a lot of research papers, and it made me think about a activity I came up with a few years ago that I used to call mammal mania. I've called it mammal mayhem. I've called it a lot of things since I've done it. I've done this at the Michigan Science Teachers. I've also done it at our Academy of Natural Resources, and even a family summit with families, not just necessarily teachers. So it's a little bit of a combination of a crime scene investigation, a scavenger hunt, some language arts thrown in, and mammal identification. So of course it helps if you start with all kinds of skulls, scat, tracks, pelts, these kind of things. If you can't get these, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Cass had some great representation in her presentation earlier, how you can do this type of an activity without having the actual stuff. But the more of this stuff you do accumulate, the better it is. So you try to get as many of these critter parts as possible, and then you go outside, preferably outside, and you set up a trail. So at each one of these scenarios, I call them, there is a predator and a prey remnants. So the idea is you have to figure out what killed what at every crime scenario. So it's really a kind of a nature's murder scene where a predator killed a prey species. You leave remnants of each behind, and people have to go along and figure out what killed what at every scenario. So you have one scenario, and in this case, you might go 20 feet down a trail or in a yard or a schoolyard or anywhere like that, and set up another scenario and another scenario. You really do it for just obviously as long as you prefer to make it. Too fast. So this is a scene from Michigan Science Teachers last year, when this was really the last time we were all together, right? Just about exactly almost a year ago, right? March 5th, March 6th. And we were at the Science Teachers in Lansing, and I ran the the program there in the hallway. So you get an idea of teachers looking at the crime scenes out in the hallway. And the third far right, you can see there's little orange cones that I had set up at each crime scene so the teachers could move from crime scene to crime scene to crime scene. And I think we had 11 set up. So again, you can do this inside or outside, but you get a better look at what it looks like here. Now, it could be difficult. You know, you can make this as hard or as easy as you want, depending on the age of the people participating. Because I know that a lot of the audience aren't exactly mammal professionals, right? They might know a handful of the bigger critters, but it can get a little fuzzy. I'd like to add limerick. It also adds a little language arts. So I think most of us remember limerick, right? So limericks are traditionally humorous and often body poems. So we'll leave the body part out for here. They're Old English. The first, second, and fifth lines rhyme, and then the middle two lines also rhyme. I went online, tried to find limericks. Most of them are terrible, or you can't repeat to the public. So I found this one, though, I really liked. There once was a lady named Bright, whose speed was much faster than light. She set out one day in a relative way and returned on the previous night. So that'll give you an idea of what a limerick is. So I had a limerick at each station for people to help get the clues. So again, after Michigan Science Teachers last year, we all ran, within a week of Michigan Science Teachers, we're all working from home, at least those of us at the DNR were, and most people, and schools right about that same time began to send all their kids home. Parents were in a panic. And we began, our staff at the DNR, our education staff began to create a whole set of volume of videos, educational videos, for both teachers to use at home and from parents to have their kids watch from home. And so I wanted to get into the act as well, because again, all of the staff were doing it. And so I came up with a series that I put on our Facebook program, and I'll show you that in a minute. But so I'll give you a sample. This is a sample of one of the first videos we did.
Hi, I'm Kevin Fraley with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and welcome to Michigan Mammal Mania. How well do you know your Michigan wildlife by its appearance or the sign it left behind? Here's your chance to find out. We've laid out a series of scenarios where one Michigan animal has attacked and killed another animal using pelts and skulls and some other sign. Your job is to identify what animal killed what other animal at each scenario, identifying the predator and the prey. Are you ready? Let's get started. Scenario number 1, murder in the marsh. It's lakes, ponds, and streams that I love, and cattails towering far above. But my habitat was shattered by something that really mattered, this small, slender hunter that I'm sick of.
Okay, if you think you know that, put it in the chat.
Hi.
Whoops, I'm going to play another one for you.
Scenario number 7, a prickly panic. This critter is tough to kill. It's hard to avoid the quills. I gave no chase, just bit his face, and now he's not so thrilled.
All right, you can drop those in the chat as well. So you got an idea of how I did it, especially with the limerick. So if you go to www.michigan.gov/nature-at-home, you'll go to the website that we put together for both parents and teachers. You scroll down the video series to the Mammal Mania. And if you look at the playlist, there's 11 scenarios, very similar to the 2 that you just saw. And then following those 11, there's answers to the 11. So you get an idea of the limericks and the layout of each one. You can cheat and look at your answers right here. If you're just in a hurry to get answers, or again, if you play those videos down the line in the playlist, the second half, you get the answer as well as the question. So again, everyone gets a set of limericks when they go to each station. I give this to them in advance, obviously, kind of with their little score sheet here. So here's an example of the question and the answer on a new one.
Scenario number 6, a nocturnal nightmare. I don't have thorns or a shell. My best defense is my smell. But that thing didn't care. It came down from the air. And now my night has gone to, well, the defense was my smell. And by looking at this critter, you have a pretty good idea that our prey species was the skunk. So what killed our skunk? First of all, it was an animal that wasn't bothered by the smell of a skunk or even skunk spray. It would be an animal that could creep up on this skunk so quietly it wouldn't even know it was coming. It was a nocturnal nightmare for sure. It was the great horned owl, our first non-mammal in our series. The great horned owl flies silently, easily snuck up, and with these giant talons, could easily dispatch the skunk. So the answer to our nocturnal nightmare, a skunk taken out by a great horned owl.
Okay, so some resources for you. If you do want to start picking up a series of skulls and, you know, track molds to make tracks, those are a lot of fun. John Gray had mentioned another one earlier in his presentation, but the Acorn Naturalist and Skulls Unlimited are typically where the DNR buys ours. Just to give you an idea, these are replicas, of course. The fox and beaver skulls I looked up yesterday, they're about $70. If you're looking for pelts, I've been buying pelts from this place for 20 years. Moscow Hide and Fur from Moscow, Idaho. I've actually been to their warehouse. They have just about everything in North America that's legal to sell, and it's a really great resource. And you can go on their website and you can pick actually the grade of the pelt you want. So for an activity like this, you certainly don't need a high grade pelt. And they sell all kinds of other critter parts too. Again, all legal. So here's some final thoughts I've got for you. Again, if your materials are too steep to buy all this stuff, or you haven't started a good collection yet, like Cash showed earlier, you could use photos from the internet and tracks, and you could still have a lot of fun. And you could just drop in some of the stuff that you have, some of the props that you might actually have to, make it a little more engaging. Again, you can make this as hard as you want. You could have kids actually use field guides to find all the answers. You could have students design their own, give them their own set of materials, let them design their own scenario and write their own limericks. That would really be cool with the language arts. And I would grade them for accuracy. You make sure that the animals that they portray, the mammals they portray, are actually are living in the right place, that animal would actually kill and eat that other animal, and that type of thing. Let me see, I've got about 2 minutes left. So I'm going to show you another fun thing. As I got done doing this, I'd done it so many times and was paying attention to all that stuff I just told you about to make sure that every critter would actually take out another critter in the right place, in the right habitat, that I decided to have fun with one of my very last ones. So let's see if you can get this one.
Scenario number 11, murder across state lines. The streak now stands at 8. The losses I'm beginning to hate. So I'll eat these nuts like they're cold cuts, and maybe that'll improve my fate.
Okay, I'll let you think about that one for like 3 seconds. And then I'm going to play the answer.
Look at this incredibly beautiful animal. What a pelt. Coloration, a great tail. Look at these claws. And a beautiful skull. I mean, this is a great carnivore right here. But unfortunately, this incredible piece of killing machine has not been able to annihilate the Buckeyes, at least not in recent times. So murder across state lines? Well, for now, you can only wish.
All right, so obviously that last one was a Wolverine there. And Wolverines don't eat Buckeyes, but you know, you gotta have a little fun with this stuff as you're going along as well.